Back in Colorado, my high school was known for being a titan or a soccer powerhouse school, but that was back in the 90s. And when I was going there, it was the early 2000s, and at that time, we were a shell of what we had used to be. I mean, if I made the team, that speaks much of just the depth of the quality of players that we had. But at that time, there was a culture around the school and around our program that we just saw ourselves as just a rung-of-the-mill, an average program with average players, incapable of making a deep run. And even though we had a new coach, I remember my sophomore year, we hired an additional new coach. And that guy, he was a very interesting character. He had a way with words, and he would always say this statement that every dog gets some light on their butt. Now, this was a public school, and so he might have used some other choice words. But regardless, his message was heard. He was trying to encourage us about working hard and taking the opportunities presented before us. Just because another school or another team or another program previously had success, it does not mean that future success is guaranteed. Thus, he called for everyone to realize that anyone's moment can come. Some may have the light on them now, but it does not mean that your turn will never come. So while you wait, you work hard, you discipline yourself, because you never know when the time will be. But sadly, that wasn't our season. We did not do very well. However, what about that idea concerning the times? What about that thought about, okay, what season we're in? What moment are we finding ourselves to be before us? If life is vanity, a vapor, a cloud of smoke that no one can truly grasp, then what do we make about the time that we have, the season of life before us, and the present circumstances that we find ourselves in? How do we go about understanding those moments? And how do we live in light of those times? Thus, our theological focus for this morning, the central aim that I feel like these 8 verses are moving us to see is this, is that God has ordained the times in this fading world. God has ordained the times in this fading world. Just one point for us this morning, fairly simple, is this: the times under the sun. And that's our point for us this morning. The times under the sun. So again, God has ordained the times in this fading world, and the point for us this morning is the times under the sun. And so before we get into the text, I want to review for us to see where we've come from and how we have got here. We studied that this book in Ecclesiastes, written by what we know as the preacher, who postures himself, presents himself to be Solomon, and we're not totally sure if that's true, but even in light of that, we can glean much from the insight of him pulling from Solomon, or if it truly is Solomon's work. And what we see, though, is Solomon, described to be the wisest man in the world, by way of God, comes to assess life in this fading world, and his conclusion is fairly simple, that life apart from God is meaningless. It is but a vain pursuit. For life is like a vapor, as I mentioned earlier. It is like trying to grab at a mist or smoke. You may pursue it with all your might, but at the end of the day, you cannot handle smoke. And that is life. Because no matter what one does to toil and gain in this life under the sun, they will die, and all such efforts will fade away. And so that's the preacher's conclusion. And he goes to demonstrate just how he got there. And so he uses first his wisdom that God has given him, the greatest mind that we have come to understand. And he says, can wisdom find purpose and delight in this fading world? But to his demise, it does not. With the wisdom that God had given him, Solomon comes to conclude, or the preacher concludes, that this road is broken and it is crooked. And what is crooked cannot be made straight. What is lacking cannot be added by way of human hands or human efforts. But what if we take his wisdom and we look at folly, or the life lived wisely? versus the life lived foolishly. Surely there is gain there. But to his dismay, the preacher assesses that although he observed and looked at these things, an increase of knowledge in his comprehension of wise living and foolish living actually just increases sorrow all the more. But what about pleasures then? If wisdom cannot make sense of life, what about pleasures? What if he pursued everything that his heart desired? Will he then find purpose in life? And so the preacher pursues. And as we said, if the preacher echoes Solomon's life, then we see how Solomon built lavish palaces, vast gardens, vineyards, aqueducts to water his gardens and his parks. He acquired singers, personal singers for himself, male and female slaves who raised slaves and their family. He had concubines to satisfy every physical pleasure he could desire. Wealth and pleasure, he had it all. He pursued it all. And to his dismay, it was meaningless as well. For again, life ends. And when it ends, all these things are done. For the temporal things cannot satisfy the eternal longings of the human heart. And as Pastor Lou preached last week, he helped us to see that although the preacher can assess that there is some benefit to living wisely over and against living foolishly, but at the end of the day, the wise and the fool, they end up in the same place, 6 feet underground, may even be buried next to each other. And so no matter how wise he is, no matter how well he stewards his life and builds the things that he does and toils for in this life, once he leaves this earth, everything he labored for will be passed down to someone else to enjoy. And who knows what that person will do, whether they will live wisely or foolishly. And so thus he hated life. But the paradox of life is this, is that when we see God as the first cause of all things, when we recognize him rightly as the creator and sustainer, the one who gives and the one who takes, then one can truly begin to delight in this fading world. Well, what do you mean? Well, as we said, apart from God, life is meaningless. But when one fears the Lord, they begin to see that everything they have is but an undeserved gift. Yes, nothing will last, but to be able to enjoy a cold drink after a hard day's work in the sun, that 5-minute release is but a gift. To stand back and look at what your hands was able to put together and labor for, and to see how it comes out well and good is but a gift from God. For the ability to create and to work and to move and to taste and to see and to hear is but a gift from God. And so you enjoy these things, knowing that God has given us these things to enjoy. And the paradigm shifts. We no longer see the vanity of life, but we have a heart of thanksgiving even in these small moments. And so we recognize God as the giver of everything. For we deserve death, and death is coming for us all. Yet God still gives such good gifts for us to enjoy. And so enjoy them while you can. Not for yourself, not to find meaning in those things, but so that you can say, thanks, God. Praise be to God. Glory unto the God who has made such things. Because if life is a vapor, those moments of blessings come and go. For with life there is but, as this poem says this morning, a season for everything. A season for everything. And so with wisdom, with pleasure, and toil as the preacher pursues, it is all vanity if it is divorced from God. And now the preacher then moves to discuss a new topic at hand, which is this topic of time. And you'd expect for him to cry out, maybe how fleeting time is, how you and I could never get back the time we spent, or like our modern day philosopher, Master Oogway from Kung Fu Panda, when he said yesterday is history, tomorrow's a mystery, but today is a gift. That is why it's called the present. But contrarily though, in a twist from what we have seen from the preacher, he actually breaks out into a poem. And he presents to us the category of time by way of this poem. In doing so, he introduces not the fleeting nature of time, but rather the God who has ordained all things in time. So today we'll look at this poem, and then next week, Pastor Matthew will lead us in unpacking the implications of God as being sovereign over time. And so in this section, we have 14 pairs of contrasting opposites. Now, 7 is a biblical number, one of the biblical numbers for completion, alongside numbers like 3 and 12. And thus to have 2 pairs of 7 points towards this particular Hebrew poetry as communicating a sense of wholeness or completeness. And so what is that completeness? Well, the completeness is and relates to the activities done under the sun. Now, the completeness is not as though this list is exhausting everything done under the sun, but it describes or descriptively communicates the human experience of life in this fading world. Now, the word description is crucial because I don't want us to think that, okay, the preacher is advocating for any of the actions he describes here. Rather, he is describing, he is articulating, he is displaying the human experience before his readers, that everything done under heaven has its time. It has its season. And so we'll look at these pairs and we'll unpack them. And after unpack them, we'll work towards addressing, okay, well, how does this change our lives? So this first pair we see in verse 2. It says, let me just start reading from verse 1 and then we'll look at verse 2. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. This first pair has to do with life and death. The human experience of life under the sun contains both. And he uses 2 examples to articulate this reality. Firstly, birth and death, and then secondly, to plant and to harvest. Now, all of us to some degree, we can relate to this. I mean, we were all born. I mean, it's probably we can't remember when we were born, but we've seen people coming to this earth. Those of us who have children have seen our children get born. But all of us, we've been to funerals to some degree, whether it be our loved ones or family and friends, extended people we know, we've seen that. But even though we may not be an agricultural society nowadays, and you and I may not be in that context, we still have a limited experience to see that when the springtime comes, the crops will be planted, the seeds will be sowed, and once fall comes around, all such crops will be harvested, and if not, then they'll wither by way of just the natural cycle. Everything will die, all the leaves will fall, and the seasons will change. And life has both experiences. And the effect we get from this text is that no matter what we do, we cannot stop both from being a part of our experience. I mean, right now at GCC, we're in a period of life. We have predominantly more younger people than old, with young children and young families, welcoming more babies to the fold. But church, may that not blind us from the reality that as great as the experience of joy in life is, death will be a part of our experience as well. And the sooner we realize that, the better it'll be for us as we move forward. The second pairing that is here in verse 3, it says, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build. See, secondly, to contrast the first pair, this second pair, instead of addressing the positives first, presents the negative or undesirable actions first. Whereas to be born and to plant comes first in the first pair in verse 2. Now the negative comes first, to kill and to break down. The emphasis here is on the category of destroying and building. There are times within the human experience in life that humanity goes through the intentional putting of others to death. There are times within our experience of life under the sun where cities are committed to destructions, crops are devoted to burning, families are destroyed, or nations fall. Now, once again, this is not as though the preacher is prescribing that because this is an experience that we should pursue them. Rather, he's displaying that this is a part of the experience of life under the sun. But consequently, on the flip side, there are moments of unity. moments of reconciliation, rekindling, a healing, and a building up of what was once destroyed or what once needed nourishing before it was ruined. Now, humanity may find themselves engaged in one of these or both. And with you and I, we may see one or the other in our lifetime. But regardless of the experiences within life under the sun, these seasons will come and they will go. And they will be what we face in life. Some may just see moments of destruction, and some may just see moments of building. The third one, in verse 4, there's a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Along with such experiences, this next pairing engages the emotions that accompany them. Firstly, and maybe more individually, this first pair are the emotions expressed in weeping and laughing, in tears and in joys, in times of lamentation and times of cheer. Both are within the spectrum of emotions that we have. And just like the previous two groups, some of us may find ourselves in an extended period of tears or an extended period of laughter and of joy. Others may only know the experience of tears, while others only know laughter and joy. Regardless, they both are experiences that we have on this earth. Secondly, the author moves more towards language that articulates not just an individual expression of tears and joy, but a corporate or public participation in mourning and celebration. I mean, your loved one passes away. Tears are shed, and the whole family mourns. I mean, you leave a job that you love, and all your coworkers, your bosses, everyone, they feel that. I mean, you move to a new home. Your whole family feels the weight of saying goodbye, even though we look forward to a new place. There's a sense of, well, we're going to miss that season of life there. Or your child goes off to college, and you see them go. And though there's a joy there, there may be a mourning there. As you see them go, as you realize life may not be the same, the family unit may not look the same, may not feel the same. Whatever the situation is, we are constantly going back and forth in experiencing all the ranges of emotions within what is described here in this life under the sun. And friends, to think that some emotions are to be neglected or never experienced or avoided would be foolish. Because as the preacher says, there will always be a season for both. There will be a season for both. That's why even in our church covenant, we assume that this is the reality of life. We're going to have moments of rejoicing and moments of mourning. That's why we call each other to live in such a way that we rejoice with those who rejoice and we mourn with those who mourn. And so the next one in verse 5. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. Now the next pairing in this middle section here is somewhat harder to comprehend in terms of what the preacher has in mind. And there's a couple reasons to it. Firstly, this pairing of these two is longer than the rest of the 6 pairings that we've read. Right? It's a little longer, a little more lengthy, a little more unpacking there. But secondly, there is no wordplay opposites. Right? Where you get to be born and to die, where you get laughter or weeping and then laughter. But here, rather the opposite is the verb or the action. That's what contrasts the two. You have the stone as the same, but either you cast it or you clear it. You have embracing being that which is consistent, but either you choose to embrace or you don't. But however, the real tension lies in that these imageries are somewhat vague. What is the imagery of casting and gathering stones and embracing and not embracing? What does that point towards? And so there have been a couple proposals throughout church history. Firstly, within Jewish commentary, such as the Midrash, there are people who think that the casting and gathering stones have a more intimate connotation between a husband and wife. That the stones could potentially be a word that's innuendally used with a connotation to point towards a woman's menstrual cycle. And so it could point towards the author suggesting that there's a time to love and a time not to intimately love. And that could be one proposal. The second proposal is that the casting and clearing of stone actually point towards an agricultural connotation. You know, if the people at this time were aware of just agriculture, aware of that context, then they would know that to cast a stone into a field is to ruin it, and to clear a field of stones is to prepare it for planting. I mean, we see this happening in places like 2 Kings verses 3:19 and also in 25. But in 3:19, we see Elisha prophesying against the Moabites, and he says to ruin their choice land by what? By casting stones on it. And so that is another proposal. A third one is that others, they take a look at this and they see that there's a level of ambiguity here. And so they look at both the imagery of casting and clearing stones and embracing and not embracing to actually point towards maybe just a broader expression of affection in relation to either greeting others or welcoming others, bringing them in or not bringing them in. And so due to the uncertainty of clarity, I tend to, I'm going to be honest, I tend to just lean towards more broader understanding of the text. That whereas a narrow understanding tends to lean towards this expression of love between husband and wife, but a broader understanding of this passage tends to lead towards a wider expression of affection that welcomes and accepts, or it turns away and rejects and sends off. And so if that is the case, then there are seasons to embrace and then seasons to let go. As I thought about this, I was reminded of just my college experience during my undergraduate studies. In that season of life, I made many dear friends that I embraced, that I loved. I built my life around those friendships for those 4 years, and they were such formative years for me. However, that time has passed. I mean, I can't believe it's already been 10 years since I graduated. And I've had to let go of some of those friendships. Not that we're no longer friends, but the season of friendship shared together in that context has passed. And so to expect those friendships to have the same level of accountability and depth or affinity as when we were together in college is maybe unrealistic or maybe even unhealthy. For we're all scattered now and in different seasons of life. And so there was a time to embrace, to love, and to hold close. But now is the time to cast out, to move, and to send off and go separate ways. Verse 6, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away. This next pair has to do with what one possesses. In life, there are times when we have to look to acquire something or to hold on to what we have and to care for it, while there are other times when we have to give it away and depart from it. I mean, nowadays there's a niche movement going around about buying items that last. I mean, it's a list of top 10, top 5, buy it for life items. And this movement is working to counteract maybe the quick replacement philosophy that accompanies our consumeristic society that we might have found ourselves in. I mean, you probably heard the statement before, is that they don't make them like they used to, whether it be cars, whether it be homes, or appliances, or clothes. There's a critique among consumers that items made nowadays are being made purposely not to last, so that you keep buying them anew. Instead of fixing them up and having them go on, you just throw it away and replace it. But friends, it's foolish to think that there are some things that will always last. Though there may be some things that have been made with a superior quality, greater attention to detail, the reality of life is that there are going to be seasons where you have to seek and hold on to certain things, and then there's going to be seasons where you have to depart from it and to move on. And these are regular experiences ordained by God. Verse 7, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent or to keep silence and a time to speak. Now, this pair is not as difficult as verse 5, but it still possesses a challenge in understanding how these two things relate to one another. How does tearing and sowing relate to keeping silent and speaking? If we think about it, though, in Scripture, when we see the phrase or the concept of tearing clothes, it often refers to a period of mourning. We see it throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. When individuals are enraged or overwhelmed with sorrow or anger, they tear their clothes. And so naturally, following the tearing of their clothes, they would sew it back together after their period of mourning. Now, the second contrast is somewhat easier to comprehend, that there are times when we have to remain silent, and there are times when we should move to speak. Now, these two may not be directly related in terms of action, but they are related if we see it broadly from the context of wisdom applied. Within such moments, there are times to respond, a time to temper ourselves. There are moments where anger and rage are expressed, and moments when we have to collect ourselves. There are times when it is wiser and maybe for us to exercise temperance with our tongue, and maybe other times when we can respond and should respond. And so we get to our last pair in verse 8. A time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Finally, our last pair moves us to see, similarly to our third pair, that moves us from an individual or a general expression of affection to a corporate expression. And as I read it, hopefully you noticed, even as our brother Herman read it, the corresponding pairs are switched. I mean, first you have love, then to hate. And the second pair is war and peace. And so love and war are aligned, and then hate and peace are aligned. Some may wonder why, but others have noted that, okay, this is probably a chiastic structure, and it is most likely done to give the poem a sense of closure. A sense of closure. But with that being said, as we look at the words themselves, to comprehend is not too difficult. There are seasons in life where we love. It could be within your family, where you're growing to love your spouse or your children, making peace with others, or nations coming to terms, moving to peace, no longer in discord. At the same time, the human experience has moments of hatred as well, where war is the theater where the hatred is expressed, affecting more than just a few individuals, but nations and lands all alike. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I will continue to stress this. The preacher does not advocate or prescribe for any of these things as though he's calling them to action. Rather, he's showing the full spectrum of life under the sun. That there are moments of war and there are moments of peace. There are moments that we love, yet moments when we go through hatred as well. But as I read through this poem, I could not help but ask the question, what is the preacher doing? What is he trying to accomplish? As we worked through and talked about everything contained within this poem, I myself was filled with thoughts, examples, moments, and even particular seasons in my own life. And dear friends, that might have been the same for you. That as we began to work through these verses, you recall the time. Maybe when you had to move to a new house, all the preparations that went into it. As you were in a period of seeking and casting away, working to build something new. Or maybe some of you recall the times where you had to bury loved ones, and the tears and the emotions and the fears and the anxieties that accompanied it all. Or maybe even feelings of just relief, knowing that they're gone, no longer have to suffer and go through the things of this world. Some of us maybe recall moments where you were put in situations, then you had to consider, should I respond by saying what is on my mind, or should I not? Should I keep my tongue? And many of us still live with the consequences of either speaking out or holding our tongue. And we recall such moments. But as we think about such experiences in life, it would be foolish of us to think that we are the orchestrators of our lives, as though we fashioned those moments to be, as though we are the first cause of what seasons are coming and what seasons are going. But as the preacher talks about this, he speaks about these as things happening to us. It's not as though the preacher is primarily telling us what we do in this life under the sun. Rather, I think along the lines of other theologians and preachers that this text reveals not what we do, but what God has ordained for us to walk in. And in the week to come, we'll see how the following verses unpack that for us. And we'll work towards seeing the implications as God as ordainer, God as giver, God as creator, and the multifaceted experiences that we have in this life. God is Lord of all. He's Lord of all. But what about us then, today, church? As we hear this, what about us? As some of you think about life, you think about the seasons that come and go. I mean, some of us may feel a sense of uncertainty, for life seems to be so inconsistent. And if life is already a vapor, something we work towards, you can never achieve it. If life is vanity, if the pursuit of wisdom, pleasures, and work and toil is but vain. And how much so then, if all of these seasons that we go through in life are ordained by God, that when it comes, you and I have no way of stopping it, that when it happens, we just find ourselves in it. What then? And if that's the case, then life just seems so inconsistent. And who can know the times or seasons that lie ahead? Now, for some of you may wonder, well, what should I do then? How should I prepare? What should I say? What counsel should I provide? Should I buy that new house? Should I get that new car? Should I go to this school? Should I pursue this route or option? Should I keep certain things that I have? Should I expect the death of my loved ones to come quickly? But what if I go first? Well, what then do I do? What then? Friends, while life is uncertain and inconsistent, my friends, there is one who remains the same. And not only does he not change, but he is Lord of time. Proverbs 30, verses 2 and 5. The man declares, I am weary, O God. I am weary and worn out. Surely I am too stupid to be a man. I have not the understanding of a man. I have not learned wisdom, nor have I knowledge of the Holy One. Who has ascended to heaven and come down? Who has gathered the wind in his fist? Who has wrapped the waters in a garment? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name? And what is his son's name? Surely you know. And friends, we've already studied in Colossians 1 that he, which is Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers, authorities, all things were created through him and for him. Friends, if you're uncertain of life, my invitation for you today is to come and see the one who's made all things, who's fashioned all things, who sustains all things by the power of his word, as Hebrews says. The one who was and is to come. The one who existed from eternity past and now works towards accomplishing his Father's will and all that is to come. For Jesus is Lord of time. And in his ministry, he knew exactly when to speak, when not to speak, when to flip tables at the temple, and when to be calm, when to love Mary as she washed his feet with expensive perfume, when to rebuke the religious hypocrites, and when to gently care and tender rebuke for the woman at the well. Christ is Lord of all. As he proclaims his miracles and demonstrates himself, he says, what? Do not go out and share, because why? It is not the time. But as Paul says in Romans, Jesus came at the proper time to die for you and I, to do what the Father has called him to do. So that when Christ went on the cross, he reconciled this broken world that seems so inconsistent that you can't seem to put your finger on anything, that when you think you're in the clear, you just hit another roadblock on the way. And you wonder what is going on in life. Know that Jesus in his life and in his death on that cross has reconciled all things. back to the Father. Everything that is broken, everything that is inconsistent, everything that as we look at it and say, this is not the way it's supposed to be, that Christ has redeemed all of that by way of his work on the cross. Come today, if you've not trusted in Jesus. See that he has rescued you. See that he has done all the work required to renew this broken world. He's redeemed you from your fallen state of sin, redeemed you for the actions that you commit to confirm your sinfulness, and rescued you from the death that is coming in your life. And come and rest in him. He has given you a sure and certain future, eternity with him, even though life may seem so uncertain. To my dear saints, you who may wrestle with anxiety or with a fearful disposition, with a doubtful posture, you who may live as though you have to prepare for every possible outcome that could potentially come ahead, or you who live as though you have everything under control, as though you thought it through, be careful, my dear friends, for one can comprehend intellectually that Christ sits on the throne, but they can live as though God is not sovereignly in control. Allow the truths within this text to calm your anxieties, to quell your fears, to cast away your doubts. May we confess our sin in trusting ourselves, in fearing man more than in God. For if God is the one who ordains certain seasons to come and go, then you can trust that whatever season you find yourself in, whatever moment may be present in your life right now, that God is not on vacation. It's not as though he's not aware of what's happening. Rather, he is working to maximize his glory in your life. To maximize his glory in your life. And it would serve us well to walk in whatever season we face with an unshakable confidence in our God. Yes, if that season is accompanied with tears, then dear friends, cry. But never doubt that God is good. Yes, if that season is accompanied with joy and with growth, with building and success, then we rejoice. But never to boast as though it was because of me, but rather this is a gift from God. Friends, knowing that God has ordained all things should actually move us to take advantage of every single opportunity in our day and our life. For if we know that we don't control everything happening around us, that frees us to say, okay, God, what have you given me to do then? What do I have control over? What are the things you've called me to do? Because friends, you and I, we don't know the seasons that lie ahead. Whether life or death is coming, whether love or hate is on the shore. Regardless, we shall not fixate our energy to change what God has ordained. And so then that frees you to be faithful and to do what God has called you to do right now. And so practically, you may wonder, well, what then? What does that mean? Well, I think if we can't control anything, but we realize what God has called us to, then just practical ways that works itself out. You can go and reconcile with that loved one who you may have tension with. You can say that you were wrong, and you can ask for forgiveness. Don't wait for the proper time, for who knows when the time will come, or when it will change, or what season you may find yourself in. Go and share the gospel with that person the Lord has placed on your heart. You may think, oh, there's time. Oh, more opportunities may come. But who knows what season lies ahead? Who knows what opportunities may or may not be available? If it is there, let us take it and trust that God is Lord of all. And we'll be faithful with what he's called us to. Invite that individual out for a meal. Make that move to do what the Lord has placed on your heart. I mean, don't wait around for someone to tell you how you can serve others in this church. But if you see a need, then fill that need. And oh, if there is that sin in your life that is just so persistent that you just keep around and think, okay, maybe I'll get to it another time. And you keep saying, oh man, I keep struggling with it. But when you say struggling, it actually is a word to mean that, okay, you're actually giving up to it more than you think. Then cast it away. Commit to putting it to death. Don't wait, okay, until I have certain things lined up. When I'm in this season of life, when this comes, then I'll do those things. But no, friends, do it now. And oh, if you have heard the gospel, if you've heard what Christ has done for you, if you've seen that God is the creator, that he's good, that though humanity has sinned and consistently and perpetually turned from him, but that he's rescued us by way of his Son. And if your heart sings for Jesus, as you heard his gospel call, and you've said no to this world, and no to your sins, and yes to Christ, then don't crawl towards something like our baptism and membership in the church, but run, for you are free, and free indeed. Let's pray.